Good morning. Today's sermon is entitled In the Interim. And I guess we all know what interim means, an in-between time. In this case, the time between the retirement of a long-term settled minister, the Reverend Sarah Person, and the installation of another settled minister, or more likely, due to the numbers in search for a parish ministry position, a minister who enters into a fairly short-term contract of a year or two or three with the congregation. My training for interim ministry began in August 2022 when I and about 30 other UU ministers from across the country gathered in Montgomery, Alabama for 5 days. We talked at length about the nature of interim ministry as our instructors, the Reverends Keith Crone, Patrice Curtis, and Margaret O'Neill, led training sessions, fielded questions, tried to parse out the difference between the tasks of a settled minister and an interim, and led us on tours of some of the most important cultural institutions in the city. And those include the Rosa Parks Museum, the Legacy Museum, and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, Brian Stevenson's brainchild, a memorial dedicated to the legacy of enslaved Black people, people terrorized by lynching, a memorial dedicated to African Americans humiliated by Jim Crow, and people of color burdened with contemporary presumptions of guilt and police violence, in the words of Alabama Tourism Department's Civil Rights Trail itinerary description. These were important experiences, not just for prospective interim ministers, but for all Americans to share. The training continued throughout last year as we met online for 3 hours every 2 weeks for much of the church year. We interim ministers were told that our task was more instrumental than relational, though in my book, all ministry is relational, that we were to help the churches we serve to look more deeply at their entrenched patterns, to identify areas needing the attention of the congregation, and to help find ways to get gaps addressed and outdated modes of communication and presumptions examined and challenged. We were warned to some of the challenges we would face. Long-time traditions are often cherished even when they are no longer particularly functional. The board elected for governance would be only one source of authority in the church. Long-time active members without a role in governance would also hold positions of authority, sometimes acknowledged, sometimes not, sometimes in accordance with the authority of the elected board, sometimes not. We were instructed to look at church history, especially at the times when strong differences of opinion might have resulted in conflicts and schisms, some of which may have been successfully resolved, some of which may not have. I determined that the best way to proceed was to organize a series of cottage meetings, a term that was new to most folks, and where I'd be able to get to know active church members and friends of the church, where they could get to know me, a place where folks could talk freely in a loosely structured social environment about their history with the church, how they came here, what they loved about the church, what compelled them to stay, what their ongoing concerns might be. I found this to be a very helpful process, and I think most of you did as well. As with any church, there had been conflicts of opinion along the way, mostly concerning changing cultural developments, the struggle to come to grips with changing understandings of gender and sexual identity, ways to publicly address institutionalized racism, the roles of church and state, and how to accommodate both within church culture. The differences of opinion were real, but the effort to become more educated was real too, and largely successful. Some church folk left along the way. That is almost inevitable in my experience. Without exception, though, there was no lingering bitterness. Folks have been able to make peace with the process, whatever its nature, and we're now well-functioning church members, reconciled to the fact that even when our opinions differ in significant ways, we can accommodate one another and remain an open-hearted community. The most basic and most essential question for that community, of course, is, what's it for? What's its reason for being? The answer to this question should be contained in the mission statement. The church's current mission statement, I expect most of you know, is 20 years old and 180 words long. It is recommended that mission statements get reviewed every 10 years. So it's more than appropriate that revising our mission statement should be a central task of the interim period. Jeff Giddings of the Parish Committee and Mission Statement Task Force provides a nice summary in this month's newsletter. A mission statement is a succinct expression of the organization's purpose. Ideally, it is a single sentence or phrase, easily remembered and communicated, that reflects the things that bring us together as members of our church. When UU Middleboro last revised its mission statement in 2002, the result was expressive, but not succinct. With guidance from the UUA, and after examining a good number of mission statements from other churches, the task force, again in Jeff's words, dug deeply into the responses of our congregation to the ministerial search survey and the cottage meetings, and listened carefully to suggestions from individual members. The three overarching themes were clear: community, inspiration, and service. I hope you all had a chance to read the full article in the newsletter, because it very well sums up the purpose of a mission statement, the process of formulating a draft, and presenting the draft statement for you to consider at today's congregational meeting. The suggested language reads, our mission: to create and sustain a welcoming and caring community that embodies UU principles, inspires spiritual growth without dogma or creed, and promotes and serves racial and social justice. The statement is 29 words long, so it's short enough to be memorized, and once memorized, to be held in our minds and hearts. Our unison benediction is 34 words long, and a good number of you have memorized it. Long ago, I realized that the mission statement of the church is not the church's mission. Rereading Dan Hotchkiss's helpful text, Government and Ministry, reminded me where I first read this. The mission statement points the way for the church to fulfill its mission. The mission itself is the actual work of the church. Whether it conforms to the language of the mission statement or not, what we aim for, of course, is for the statement and the work of the church to be in perfect alignment. Now, here is a word of caution. Unitarian Universalists love ideas, and love to talk about ideas, and love to share ideas, and in too many cases, love to argue about ideas, and the words that give shape to ideas. No one statement is going to contain every shade of every idea that every member believes is important. When I asked Bob Waterman last year, how come the current mission statement is so long, he confirmed my suspicions. It contains every word that every individual considered important. So it's a beautiful, broadly encompassing essay, but it does not function well as a mission statement. When you consider the proposed statement this afternoon, please try your best not to get entangled in endless arguments if you feel that the touchstone elements of community, inspiration, and service have been addressed. A mission statement's function is to declare to the world who we are and what we stand for. Because Unitarian Universalism is guided by congregational polity, every congregation decides for itself what its mission is, which I think we can agree is a beautiful thing. What we do and how we treat one another while doing what we do are separate functions. What we do, that's the purpose of a mission statement. How we treat one another, that's the purpose of a covenant statement. Since the first week of our church year, we've tried out various unison readings in the form of a covenant statement, or bond of covenant, to use the traditional language. Truly, I have loved every one of them. I've been particularly encouraged by the sense of commitment that's come across as the words resonated through the sanctuary. Your voices, our words. Today, we'll consider adopting a covenant statement as well as a mission statement. The UUA provides this description. Our covenant binds us together as a community. It expresses our promises to one another and the way we will interact and uphold one another's beliefs. Nice. In September, I appointed Andrea Priest to lead a small covenant formation team, which ended up including Cindy Bernard and myself. Using the language of the three unison readings we had been reciting as a base, a draft covenant statement was fashioned. It was published in our newsletter. Feedback and suggestions were encouraged. We recited the resultant statement today. Creating a caring community is the purpose of our church. To listen deeply, show compassion, build trust, and honor our differences. These things we covenant together. If you think that that statement captures the spirit of a church community you wish to be a part of, I encourage you to adopt it. Once a covenant statement is adopted, we will include it in each order of service as a reminder to us all. As I said in my September sermon on covenant, simply saying the words won't guarantee that in the heat of a disagreement, our actions will embody our resolutions. But certainly, the more we say the words together, the more likely it will be that when we need guidance, it will be available to us. And it's something that we can hold ourselves and each other accountable to. The third task I hope we can accomplish during this interim period is less spiritual and more instrumental than the other two. This is the adoption of an organizational chart. Such a chart makes lines of discernment, which I think is a more accurate term than the old chain of command, because there's not a lot of commanding going on in this church. And we can hope instead for thoughtful discernment throughout. Lay ministry, hospitality, membership development, public relations, the investment committee, the pledge drive, the fundraising committee, children's religious exploration, adult education, the social justice committee, program planning, a staff support team or personnel committee, a website manager, a communications team, a streaming and audio team, the music committee, a governance and policy task force, a nominating committee, building and grounds, the memorial garden team, the green sanctuary. How do all these committees relate to each other? We've made some strides in getting more organized. We now have a finance committee, which is composed of a treasurer, fundraising, and the investment committee. It only makes sense that all of these entities responsible for the financial health of the church are in close communication and work together as a team to most effectively achieve our financial goals. Some of the groups we call committees are actually a dimension of the church's ministry rather than governance. And these include the Religious Exploration Committee, Lay Ministry, also known as the Pastoral Care Team, the Music Committee, and our phenomenal Social Justice Committee. I've asked these committees to submit their monthly reports to me before I submit them to the PC, and the logic is the same as with the Finance Committee. These are teams whose functions fit under a common umbrella, in this case, ministry rather than governance. As an aside, I can't emphasize enough how rewarding it has been to work with each of these groups. Now, an organizational chart may not seem very essential to your spiritual life, and you may find it a curious topic to make its way into a Sunday sermon. But the interim period requires an examination of institutional structures as well as spiritual practices. And as church members, you have a right to know how reporting and requesting structures function. And as voting members, I would even say you have a responsibility to know. And we have a responsibility to keep you informed. Another item for consideration at our congregational meeting today is a change to the first article of our bylaws. It's not very often that the name of an institution comes up for change in a bylaws. And to be clear, no one is suggesting that we give up the venerable name which has been in use since 1889, when the town hall was just 16 years old. The principal industry was located in the cotton mills along the riverfront of the Nemasket River, Titicut, Fall Brook, and Rock Village, and a little Italy enclave was created at the old Mortontown neighborhood at the corner of West Grove and Elm Streets. The first Unitarian Universalist Society of Middleboro was founded 14 years before the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, and 19 years before the Model T car was introduced by the Ford Motor Company. Our official name, our historic name, is antiquated, if I may put it politely. Still, it has historical significance and resonance and serves us in all legal capacities, so no one is suggesting it be abandoned. Still, a more modern name, a less formal name, is needed for the 21st century if we hope to attract 21st century church members. The name, which is already in wide use on our website, our email address, our visitor cards, much of our promotional material, and our newsletter articles, is UU Middleboro. Adopting it as an informal secondary name will encourage us to use it more often in conversation, encouraging its usage to become standard, and it will allow us to create new signage, more in keeping with today's styles and more effective for today's society. I think it's important, too, to adopt the helping hands as an official symbol or emblem. You see it here in the front of the altar. It's also on the banisters leading up to the, remind me what we call this? Chancel, thank you. And it's in the parlor, it's in various places, that's on our website, but it's not official. And if we adopt it as our official symbol or emblem and make sure that it's in all the communications that we send out, then people will start to see it and recognize that it represents who we are, and maybe we'll be curious to find out who that is. In 1889, when the most common forms of transportation in town were ambulation, walking, and riding horseback, or driving horse-drawn wagons and carriages, the wayside pulpit on Nickerson Ave and the glass-fronted sign facing South Main were effective means of communication. The pace was slow. People took time to look around them. An inspiring or thought-provoking message would catch attention. There was no competition from internet or portable telephones, social media, television, or even radio to cause distractions. What are the Unitarians up to this week? Certainly not the same topic as the Baptists or the Congregationalists. This was fodder for a 30-minute conversation. We need to rethink our signage, something I hope we can consider as the Public Relations Committee works with Building and Grounds in the coming months. Signs a good distance from the street and parallel to it worked fine in 1889. in 2023, signs perpendicular to the street and closer to it work best to capture the attention of motorists, who are a good deal more numerous than pedestrians these days. The interim period is a time for reflecting on our past, examining our foundational, philosophical, and spiritual structures, such as mission and covenant statements, looking closely at our organizational structure, and finding ways to change, to shift our focus from the past to the future, from a settled way of doing things to a way that may seem a bit unsettling at first, but a way which needs to be designed to keep the flame of Unitarian Universalism in Middleboro strong in the generation and generations to come. We need to consider being like Jabari and taking that leap into the welcoming, wet world. Our call is to be a 21st century church with roots and wings, a church rooted in the 19th century with wings for the 21st. So may it be, if we make it be.